Hello watch enthusiasts. Now as you know, or may have noticed, I have already released a video today on the dress watches at SIHH 2017. However, I thought that I should also make a video on the sports watches released there, despite the fact that the primary reason for the show existing is dress watches. Now before I commence this video, I would like to say that I will be at Baselworld this year for the first 2 or 3 days. Sadly I can't be there for longer due to various family commitments that were made prior. But I will be there for the first 2 or 3 days in order to take videos and photographs, which I can then put on the channel and discuss. So I hope to meet some of you there. The first watch which I'd like to talk about is the Omega Speedmaster Speedy Tuesday. And this was made to commemorate 5 years of the trend of posting pictures of Speedmasters on Tuesdays, which was set up approximately 5 years ago. So as a result, Omega has decided to commemorate this due to the popularity it's brought to this particular timepiece. This Speedmaster is designed to commemorate the Alaska 3 project, and the Alaska project was a range of Omegas which were made for a trip to the moon, to the dark side of the moon, which was designed to resist the cold of that side of the moon. However, it's in the dial which we see the most large changes to the original. Here we see that the dial has these 3 white, large numeral subdials, which add legibility due to their loomed concentric circles around their circular centre. Equally, the numerals are enlarged to make them altogether far more legible than the traditional Speedmaster subdials, and make them more functional. This case also features a far more robust finishing than the original, as instead of having polished and brushed surfaces, the entire case is brushed, including the tops of the pushers, to increase the scratch resistance of this watch and make it look altogether more military, and more of a renovation of the original Professional. In terms of the size of the watch, it remains the 42mm of the standard Professional, and only 2012 of this watch are being made, and it's actually sold out overnight because it was an internet-only special, so I imagine they will ship later in the year. Other than these small details being changed, the overall design and look of this watch is very similar to the original, bar that traditional applied Omega logo, but apart from that the movement and the Hesselite crystal are the same as the normal Professional. For reference, the price of this watch was around the £4,000 mark, though now they're worth a heck of a lot more seeing as they sold out so quickly. Next I have the Speedmaster Automatic 60th Anniversary, with the new Co-Axial Master Chronometer 9900 movement, which is of course anti-magnetic as per normal with Omega movements, with that coaxial movement which we've come to expect from Omega, and which offers fantastic timekeeping, while being fairly robust at the same time. Now this watch is very similar to the other coaxial versions in the Omega Speedmaster Professional range, with a 44.25mm case and liquid metal bezel, which I think is a very nice choice and makes the whole watch look far more modern. It also has that fantastic racing dial, which I think really is quite a beautiful touch, and certainly does hark back to the original racing Speedmasters, because of course that was their original purpose, and is similar to that dial on the Mark II I love. Really, my only comment on the dial would have been I would have preferred if the hands had been inverted in terms of their colours, because I find that I'd rather the orange, very visible hands were for the chronograph rather than timekeeping, as I find the orange a little bit overpowering with regards to having it on the large hands. However, my largest problem with this watch, and I say this with the best will in the world because I do like this watch a lot and I really wanted to like it, but the fact is that this watch is designed to be a 60th anniversary celebration of the Speedmaster, and I can imagine a lot of other vintage-inspired Speedmasters will come out at Baselworld this year, due to the nature of this year. But nonetheless, I do feel a little bit disappointed they didn't make a sort of a replica of the original, for example, because I think that would have been a much better homage to the original than a more modern and very 21st century version. Nonetheless, though, this is a fantastic choice for anyone who likes the Speedmaster but wants something a little bit more sporty and a little bit more modern than the Professional and even the Coaxial, and I think this really does fill that niche very, very nicely. Now the next watch is from Montblanc, and Montblanc has been releasing a great deal of watches under their Time Walker line, which is of course their chronograph sports sort of line, which, though it may sound like some sort of sci-fi film, certainly does offer some rather incredible features. And they've released 2 watches which have caught my attention the most. And the first is the Rally Timer. And this watch is a convertible stopwatch to wristwatch. So that's to say that when it's placed on the wristband, on the strap, it will sit on the wrist very comfortably, either vertically with the pusher on the top, or horizontally for ease of wear and for comfort. However, When taken off the strap, it can be mounted upright using two legs which extend from the case back, and either placed on a desk, or if those are retracted, used as a handheld stopwatch, which I think is a very innovative and interesting concept. Now, the movement inside this stainless steel watch in that bicompact's vertically arranged layout is a movement made in-house by Montblanc, but is inspired by the Minerva 1729, which was one of their vintage chronograph movements, and stopwatch movements, which is an interesting touch. This also is a column wheel chronograph, which is again an interesting touch and does add to the functionality and the practicality of this monopusher chronograph. Now, I think this watch is a very interesting concept from Montblanc, and certainly will draw attention to their brand as more of a sports watch manufacturer than a dress watch manufacturer, as they've usually been known. This watch is also an interesting departure from the usual very modern sports watches that are generally produced by Montblanc into a more classically inspired aspect. Despite being classically inspired, this watch certainly does follow the same features and touches of colour which are seen on the rest of the Time Walker line, and certainly the watches released at SIHH this year. Notably the colour scheme being very much black, red and white, giving that somewhat monochromatic with that splash of red colour, which adds to the legibility and to the individuality of these watches. Of course, limited to 100 pieces and costing €38,000, this watch isn't really a consumer's piece, but nonetheless is an interesting model from Montblanc. The second watch from Montblanc is the Time Walker Chronograph 1000 limited edition, and this has a 46.4mm titanium case, but really it's the movement which is interesting. This watch has an independent train system for its chronograph and time systems, which means that its time system has a 100-hour power reserve and it's manually wound. However, the chronograph is a very, very different story. This is an ultra-high frequency chronograph which in fact exhausts its independent spring barrel, in only 45 minutes. And this is because it runs at 50 Hz. So that's 5 times faster than even the highest high beat movement I've ever seen has had, which is of course that wonderful Breguet creation which runs at 10 Hz. The dial of this watch is also very interestingly arranged, with the central second hand timing individual seconds, and in fact will tell you how many tenths or thousandths of the seconds you've actually covered. Equally at 6 o'clock we have the minutes and seconds for the chronograph, as of course in the centre we don't have seconds, we have tenths or thousandths of the seconds. We do also have an interesting layout on the rest of the dial, with the main themes being red and black, giving this watch a very modern and very sporty aesthetic. Of course, the most interesting thing though about this watch is the fact that the movements are separate. It has one movement which runs the chronograph, and one which runs the hours and the minutes and the seconds for the standard time. This is why it actually has 2 spring barrels, one for each, which is again an interesting touch and an interesting way of approaching the subject and the topic of a chronograph. That said though, it's very clear to see that this watch is very much an experimental piece, from the price tag of €175,000, due to the fact that this watch is obviously going to have very, very short service intervals, due to the fact that this watch runs at such a high frequency, which will of course wear down the cogs very, very quickly. Now, having discussed the Montblanc's likely short service intervals, it's probably worthwhile seeing the opposite contrast, and this is the new Panerai Lumi ID. And this is a watch which I think is fantastic in terms of the new features it offers. And of course the key feature here is that this watch has a 50-year warranty. Now, before I talk about the movement, there are various other features which are very interesting here. So this watch has a 49mm Co-Axial case, which is that carbon ceramic case which is made by Panerai. And this has that beautiful grain through it, which I think really adds to the case, and makes it more interesting than the ceramic cases which we've seen from other manufacturers, which have a very simple, plain tone. This is finished in a sort of bead-blasted finish to give it a softer look, but equally a more rugged and more modern aesthetic. Now, the dial is a place of real interest too, where the lume is placed obviously beneath the dial, beneath that traditional Luminor-style dial, and of course on the hands. But the actual print on the dial can't be put on the dial, but rather it has to be put on the backside of the crystal, because the dial is made out of a particular arrangement of carbon nanotubes, which give this watch a very, very low reflectivity, which means that it has an incredibly black finish. In fact, it's one of the most black finishes that can be applied to anything, due to the fact that this doesn't reflect any more than less than 1% of the light in the spectrum off it, so it gives a very, very deep black tone. But as a result of this finishing, one can't actually print onto it, so the writing actually has to be applied to the crystal. Now, the movement of this watch is also incredible. This is a 3-day movement, which is a very normal power reserve for Panerai these days, and in fact at their lower end. But it's the fact that this watch has a 50-year warranty, and therefore can be serviced once every 50 years, which is incredible. This movement is made out of various ceramics and composites to have very, very low resistance, and it's lubricant-free, which allows it to not have the degradation of lubricants which is inherent in various metal-based movements, or metallic movements, which of course are seen in the vast majority of watches, giving this watch incredible longevity as a movement between services, which I think is a real first in the industry. Also, I do think the design of this watch is very much spot on, and with a very large case, but nonetheless bold and clear case, which does represent the fact that these watches were originally tools for the military, and certainly does give a very minimalistic yet bold look. Those hands are also a very, very nice choice, with those semi-skeletonized hands, which are very similar to the ones used on, for example, the submersible versions of this watch. The second watch from Panerai is another version of the Luminor. Now, this is a version of the submersible, so that's the 300-metre water-resistant diving version of this watch, with the bezel. Now, this has become a very well-known watch, and this year they've actually released a bronze version of this watch as well, a re-edition of a bronze one. But I think the most interesting one to talk about is the BMG-TECH version. Now, apart from that BMG-TECH, which I'll discuss in a moment, this watch has the 1950s style case, which I believe to be more comfortable than the standard version, as it has softened edges, and the case really is a cushion in terms of shape. It's not merely cushion-shaped as one would normally call it. Equally, it sits at a slightly thinner thickness, and equally that this watch is slightly smaller than the larger version I showed you previously. It also has this wonderful lacquered blue dial, which I think really adds to the nautical theme of this watch, and makes this watch very much the modern equivalent of the dive watches these watches once were. Now, though irregular, this dial is not what makes this watch unique, and there have actually been Luminors with blue dials in the past, though they are rare. But in terms of complications, this watch has the seconds at 9 o'clock, and also the date at 3, giving the whole watch a very symmetrical dial, despite the fact it has the displaced second hand. It's the case, however, that makes this watch so unique. And this case is made from an alloy, a glass-like alloy that contains zirconium, copper, aluminium, titanium and nickel. And this is produced with a process of high-pressure injection at a very high temperature. This is then quenched very, very quickly, and this means that the atoms don't have time to rearrange themselves in their normal pattern, but rather remain in that original form. And this gives the case very interesting features, and very, very practical ones for a dive watch like this one. These features are notably that it's extremely corrosion resistant, very hard, and also very shock resistant. And this is rare to have these two things together. Usually a very, very hard case, such as ceramic, won't be very shock resistant, while metal will have the opposite properties. This, however, has both of those properties, making this watch a very, very interesting piece. Also, the case itself is anti-magnetic, which protects the inside of the watch from magnetic fields. Apart from the case, this watch does still have a Panerai 9010 automatic movement, with approximately 200 parts, which is a run-of-the-mill movement in the Panerai range, but nonetheless is very practical and well made. This also is an in-house movement, which is nice to see. What is nice, though, about this case is the fact that it looks like steel or titanium, but has that high hardness and high scratch resistance, along with the anti-magnetism, which does make it altogether a more practical sports watch, which is of course the aim of the Luminor. Now, Audemars Piguet have released various new versions of the Royal Oak Offshore this year, in new colours, but I thought the most interesting sports watch in their range was the new chronograph version of the Royal Oak, which commemorates 20 years since the first chronograph made of the Royal Oak in 1997. And this watch resembles their other chronograph Royal Oaks very, very closely, but I think in terms of the materials used and the new dial options, this really is an interesting touch. Of course, the movement inside this watch is very typical of a Royal Oak chronograph. It's made by AP in-house, and offers really fantastic features for a luxury chronograph with those screw-down pushers. The layout is also the same, with the date at that sort of 4:30 or so point on the dial. But really it's the case that's different here. and this case is made of titanium and platinum. So the main body of the case and the main body of the bracelet is titanium to add lightness and add a sporty aesthetic and aspect to this watch, which wouldn't normally be seen on a Royal Oak. But then the bezel and the smaller links on the bracelet are in fact made of platinum to add a lustrous and luxurious aspect to this watch. Now, what I like about these material choices is the fact that AP have clearly considered that this watch is a sports watch at its heart and at its core in terms of what it does best. So AP really have considered the fact that this watch will be worn as a sports watch, despite its high price tag. But equally, people do want a luxurious watch, therefore the combination of titanium and platinum, with similarly dull metallic colours, slightly bluey metallic colours, probably a better choice of words, do give a very modern aspect to this watch, which is matched by the various blue and grey options on the dial, and the various other colours which are available, though I feel the blue and grey versions really do add a certain beauty to this watch. Anyway, I'll end this video here. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please do like, share and subscribe to help the channel and to see more content. Now please do leave your comments on what you think could have been interesting choices to show on this in this video, in terms of notable sports watches other than the ones I've shown, because I'm always interested in your opinions. So thank you very much for watching. This is Arm on the Watch Guy, over and out.